Hello, this is Space Sergeant 101 again, attempting to make a video using the machinimate properties of Grand Theft Auto 5, primarily because it's got a sort of lip sync, as you can see. It's the main reason I'm doing it, and because it is a video game, please pardon, I'm sure there'll be some video game effects that kind of interfere with this as well. But this is kind of an off-the-cuff video I want to make as an addendum to a very excellent video by a person, perhaps a group, called Endnote Studios. The video itself is on white fascism. I'll have a link to it in the description. And if nothing else, it's a really amazing video, really informative as to what fascism is, without being overly long or overly dry or anything like that. Basically, it's an excellent video. I highly recommend it. This is merely an addendum with some of my own thoughts to it. I recommend watching his video first. I'll refer to him simply as Innuendo. I don't know if there's a name he uses beyond the name of his channel, Innuendo Studios. But I recommend watching his video first. And if nothing else, this is just a recommendation to watch his video. If nothing else, get nothing else from this. But assuming you do watch the video and you do come back to this here, there are a couple messages, points I wanted to make as well, kind of addendums of my own thoughts here. First of which being, Innuendo had the sort of difficulty, I've had this too, of defining fascism off the top of your head. And like he said, it was like, Nazis. For my own thought, the way I had always defined fascism to myself, again without any sort of formal looking to define it as a political movement or anything like that, my own thought of the way of defining fascism is that it's the idea that you would want to be the person in charge, but obviously you can't be the person in charge. So long as the person in charge is like you, that's good enough. So my thought on it is it's a kind of anti-democratic take on rulership, leadership, whereas I'd like to be the absolute ruler, but if not me being the absolute ruler, somebody like me is the absolute ruler, and that's the way it should be. As you can see, my idea is a lot broader and simpler than something like palingenetic ultranationalism. In fact, nationalism isn't really needed, neither is the palingenetic thing. It really is a much broader sort of concept, focused more on the idea that I'm great, that's why I should be in charge. Failing that, somebody like me is great as well. And that's kind of the crux of my idea here, and something that the Innuendo video on white fascism definitely touches upon, but I don't think really addresses what might be a key factor into why fascism is, what kind of the root thoughts behind it, the root causes behind it as an idea and a movement that people get behind. So in that regard here, my more evolved, but my more evolved thought on what fascism is kind of a psychological or sociological notion, and I've found that this term does exist, although it may not be exactly what I'm talking about. The idea that I have here is one that I would call narcissism by proxy. It's not a person who is narcissistic by themselves or about themselves. It's a projected narcissism or indirect narcissism of something else that they can be attached to, and thus be narcissistic without directly being the narcissism themselves. And I would suggest thinking about current government situations where you might have a leader who exhibits somewhat extreme narcissism, and the reaction that invokes in people. In that if you have somebody who may not be narcissistic directly themselves, however, they can invest in something that they can be a part of, a leader that they follow, a national identity, a racial identity, and instead be narcissistic about those things are perfect, are great, grandiose, and important above everything else, then they can still exhibit narcissism, be narcissistic, but it's not directly about themselves. And that's why, obviously, the leaders that would fall onto this line, that would be a part of this, would of course seem, or obviously be, extremely narcissistic themselves. That's the projection into the narcissistic leader. And again, can't control the video game effects here so far, as I'm trying to. And again, Innuendo touches on some of this, but it only seems like he sort of skirts on it. Because again, he seems to be focused more on the mechanics of fascism. The fact that it is a hierarchy. The fact that it sort of that's the problem with off the cuff here. I'm trying to think of the phrasing here, but the fact that there's opportunism. I'll try to really bad segue here, but the fact that towards the end of his video, he talks about how the fascists, or throughout the video, he talks about the fascists as being the ones kind of driving the movement, and the current administration as potentially just being opportunists. My thought is more along the lines that the fascists are the people doing the projecting in the first place. The people making use of that are always opportunists. They aren't the fascists themselves, they're the narcissists themselves. They're the ones making use of the people who project their own narcissism into something else to make it indirect, such as, again, the nation, their race, a leader. It's not necessarily that there's a charismatic leader that they're following, it's a narcissistic leader that they're following. And that's what makes it jive, makes it work together with their own indirect narcissism. And so that's kind of one of the problems or faults, I would say, is conflating the opportunism with what might really be going on. Again, just from my own hypothesis, my own idea here. And another example, another point here, is just like he said that fascism is neither capitalist nor anti-capitalist. For example, it's whatever worksist. Narcissism is neither capitalist nor anti-capitalist. It's whatever feeds the narcissismist. A lot of these sort of details either fit without any sort of conflict or explain or better explain areas that perhaps palingenetic ultranationalism might not. That's what I was kind of get to before, the mechanics of fascism. The palingenesis winds up being a great storyline to work, but it just winds up being a useful tool. It's not really the reason why. The whole rebirth sort of thing works as a great storyline to feed the narcissism. It's not necessary in and of itself, it's important in and of itself, it just works well with a narcissistic storyline. Palingenesis is just going to show up because it feeds the narcissism. It's the same thing for, or a similar thing I should say, for why it kind of devolves into a death cult. Nothing's good enough for the narcissist. Eventually, no matter how control how hierarchical it gets, it's not good enough. It's also melodramatic because narcissism is melodramatic. That's why We Succeed or Die. That's melodrama. It's an aspect of the narcissism, again. And just one other. Listen. Get rid of this again. One other sort of last point here. Focusing on the hierarchy definitely is a key detail, because hierarchy is kind of a whole swath of thinking about people, how people relate to each other. In fact, it was kind of a almost black and whitish. One end of the spectrum being thinking of people interactions and relations in terms of egalitarianism, equality, and at the other end, thinking of it in terms of hierarchy. And fascism seems to be a more extreme end of the hierarchy end of that spectrum. And again, I would say that the root cause behind it, my hypothesis kind of is, root cause behind it has to do with narcissism at the end. Narcissistic personality disorder type situation, but you wouldn't consider the followers, the fascists if you will, as the ones exhibiting the narcissism, because they're going around their own selves, their own ego, to project it into something they're part of. I'm following this leader who is great, the narcissism there, not myself. The nation, the greatest nation that's ever been. The narcissism isn't about myself, it's about the nation that I'm a part of. And again, the race, too. It's about the race I am a part of, not about myself in particular. So I've avoided the narcissism being about me, made it about something else that I'm a part of. I still get, I guess you'd call it the psychological benefit of the narcissism that way, by making it indirect. Anyway, that's my off-the-cuff, very rambling thought on the subject here. And again, I hope to make more of these videos, and I hope to use this tool better, because it's one of the few tools I got for making videos. Don't have a computer or much equipment here. And please, if you'll give me a chance, like this video and subscribe to show that it might be having some impact, because probably not a lot of these videos are even going to get seen. But hopefully I can get some points across, some good points across, that are worth making and worth hearing. And thank you very much for the opportunity to listen to this, even though it has been terribly rambling. Thank you very much.